Ablating, real eosinophilic. Sertoli cells, Sertoli cell nucleus. Okay. When I say pseudostratified epithelium to you, probably you're thinking of respiratory epithelium, which is pseudostratified ciliated columnar. Right? So it's a tall kind of epithelium. In the epididymis, we have a pseudostratified columnar epithelium, but it's not ciliated, it's stereociliated. And that's kind of a funky term. It basically means that it's an immotile cilium, which is kind of a contradiction. It's better to think of it as a long branched microvilli. All right? So that's what you're seeing here, this little crew cut factor. All right, so epididymis. Now we come to the secondary sex gland. And the way I prefer to deal with the seminal vesicle and the prostate is by eye looking at the slide. All right? This is an example reasonably representative of seminal vesicle. And you look at this slide, what comes to mind is you've got a tubular structure that has pretty large lumen, and the mucosa is folded or plicated, right? Somewhat loosely analogous to the oviduct, but you would never make that mistake. And if you were worried about it, you would go to high power on the oviduct, and what type of cells would you expect to see? Ciliated columnar, simple, with PEG cells. And that's going to make you feel real comfortable about oviduct and not get confused here. All right? So, plicated mucosa, big lumen. Did I say something that was unclear?
No.
Okay. In contrast to prostate, you've got lots of tiny little lumina here, but they're in a parenchyma that's fibromuscular, right? So a fibromuscular stroma. I mean, if you look at that, and look at that, and I expect each of you to pull your slides out, lay them on a light background, and make sure you can make that distinction. Because I promise you, you will see seminal vesicle and prostate on the slides, all right? The thing that's nice about the prostate, once you get yourself headed that way, is that you have these corpora amylacea. You want to make sure that you can see the ring structure to it, all right? Okay, so let's start where we left off last time, and if I remember right, it was GI tract where we need to pick up. So, what are we looking at here? So it looks like a cross-section. It's not a complete cross-section. What kind of epithelium do you think that is? Non-keratinized, good. Do you see a muscularis propria? Right, out here. What about a muscularis mucosa? And look how big it is. And since this is cut in cross-section, the muscularis propria is also in cross-section, which means it's oriented parallel to the longitudinal axis, which has to make this esophagus, right? Here we have some nice esophageal glands. We look at a longitudinal section of the esophagus, and how do I know that it's longitudinal? I see people doing the right thing, but I mean, that's not going to cut it. We've got to use the vocabulary here. What's longitudinally oriented? Okay, so you know that it's a longitudinal section. So we've got the mucosa, lamina propria, submucosa, muscularis. And here is a high-power shot of mid esophagus, where we've got both visceral, striated, and smooth muscle. What are we looking at here? And what region of the stomach?
Fundic junction.
Fundic or corpus, or body of the stomach, not at the gastroesophageal or the gastroduodenal junction. And we know that because we look down here in the gastric glands and they're not mucus, right? All right, so the mucosa then is here. So we've got muscularis mucosa, we've got a lamina propria that's surrounding these glands. We come all the way up to the surface, right? At low power, you look at this and you see that there are three regions. So this tricoloration, it's based for the most part on staining characteristics, which tells you what's there. The parietal cells crank out a lot of acid, right? So they're going to be eosinophilic. Down here, a lot of rough ER, protein for export, the pepsinogen, chief or zymogenic cells. And up here you've got kind of a funky mixture, because you've got surface mucus cells, which are columnar cells. The apical 2/3 of the cell is producing mucus, which doesn't stain very well. And their nuclei, which do stain, are at the bottom of the cell. All right? So again, this is something you can see just by looking at eye, by eye. That tricoloration, if you get that, you got to start thinking stomach, and in particular the fundic or corpus region. What are these guys right here? Exactly. What? I heard blood vessels. That's correct. Panna-cells, the crimson colors, you're right, it's the same. But where do we find panna-cells?
Small intestine.
Small intestine, normally, only in the small intestine. And what about surface mucus cells? Where are they found? Surface mucus cells are found only in the stomach, okay? And here's a, so we're going to kind of just move our way through at higher power. Here's a shot of the top portion with the gastric pits. And you can see nicely these columnar cells with the nuclei at the bottom, stacked one right next to each other. And they are distinct from goblet cells, right? Distinct shape and orientation. Here we're down into the gastric gland and we can see lots of parietal cells. See more of them here, these pink fried egg factors with some chief cells interspersed. See some capillaries, which you know are in the lamina propria surrounding these densely packed gastric glands. Okay, where are we here? The pyloric region, or close to the gastroduodenal junction, also could be up at the gastroesophageal, the cardiac region, right? Where the glands themselves are cranking out mucus, in addition to what you have out of the gastric pits. Here, nice shot of the gastroduodenal junction, and it really gives you, in the same frame, a feel for villi versus gastric pits. All right? What's this puppy right in here? And that's characteristic of what region of the small intestine? Good. And then we've got the pyloric sphincter right there. So, even though this is high power, we know because of that it's the duodenum. What is this? What are these right here? Crypts of Lieberkühn, intestinal glands. I think I heard that. And here you can just start to pick up that crimson stain that confused you of the Panna cells. Okay? And they hang out at the base of the glands. This is from the jejunum, and a little hard to tell how I know that other than the slide was labeled such. You can see nicely the villi, and you can see an intestinal gland, and clearly these nice goblet cells that are interspersed among what kind of epithelium? simple columnar that has a striated border, which are microvilli, right? The microvilli in the proximal convoluted tubule is called a brush border. Here's